Okay, brilliant. I'm going to kick us off. Welcome. Great to see everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So this is the first of two webinars we're doing looking at apprenticeship retention and completion. Today, really pleased to have two of my favorite AFA members. We've got Randy Wolf from ESETS and Tony Bryant from CyberUp. And we're going to have a bit of a conversation with them about their programs and how they get good completion rates for apprenticeships. Before I bring our panel in, I just want to say a bit about upfront about why AFA cares so much about retention and completion, how it fits into our thinking. So firstly, just to set the scene, we know we've got a problem with completion in apprenticeship. So the latest stats we've got put apprenticeship completion nationally at 42%. There's lots of variation within that. There's particular states have got higher rates. There's industries, programs we know that they're getting sort of 80, 90% completion. But overall, nationally, over half of apprentices aren't finishing their program. And that's a problem. All of the good things we know outcomes wise about apprenticeship, that 80,000 starting salary, that 300,000, increase in lifetime earnings. That's all based on research looking at completion. So yeah, we know we've got an issue there. To put those numbers in context, firstly, it's not terrible compared to other programs. So associate degree completion ranges, 30 to 50%. Certificates is around 50%. Bachelor's degrees, 64%. But there's definitely room for improvement. If you look internationally, other countries' apprenticeship systems, their completion rates are 60 to 75%. So we know we can do a better job there. And beyond the kind of obvious point about outcomes, just to say a bit about why AFA cares about completion in the context of our goal, apprenticeship expansion, getting to 4 million apprentices. Improving completion in a way is one of our easiest levers for growth. So just to go back to the numbers, if we manage to get completion up to just 50%, so 8 percentage points increase, that would mean an extra 60,000 apprentices staying active. So, you get an almost instant 10% growth system-wise if you could increase completion. And then we've also got this kind of knock-on problem, apprentices who aren't retained, who are dropping out is going to hinder expansion. You're going to have a lot of employers who, are not going to continue with apprenticeship programs if their apprentices aren't sticking in. So that's just a bit of context up front. I'll bring in our panelists in a second. Just a bit of housekeeping. So we're going to have a bit of a conversation with Randy and Tony for half an hour or so, and then we'll start bringing the audience and Q&A. So if you've got questions as we go through, please put anything in the sidebar. Or if you want to wait to the end and put your hand up and come in, that would be great too. So Randy, Tony, it's great to have you here. Let's start with some introductions. Can you tell us a bit about yourselves, your organizations, and can you talk a bit about why you got into the apprenticeship world? Let's start with you, Randy.
Okay, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to share a slide. Hold on a second. There, can you see it?
Yeah.
Continue to share. Yeah, you see the big slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Randy Wolf. I'm the founder and executive director of Early Care and Education Pathways to Success. We launched in July of 2019. This is a quick overview of our statistics. I'm not going to walk through it, but people can sort of glance at it, and we'll do Q&A later. Anybody can ask anything they want. But what I want you to know about ESEPS as an organization and where we fit into the world of apprenticeship, more broadly, is that we stick to our lane. So in the 6 years that we've been working at this, it's always within the framework and within the sort of borders of the early care and education industry. We have 6 different apprenticeships. So we have apprenticeships for associate teachers, lead teachers, home visitors, infant toddler teachers, and expanded learning, which is, for those who might not know, is sort of the new term for after school care. But that's who we are. That's who we focus on. And some of that will become, the reason for my explaining that will become clear as we go through the rest of the questions. And I would say, in terms of your question, Harry, how we got into this, I have a background of about 45 years working in early care and education as a teacher, as a child care center director, as a family support center director, and then as a university professor for 10 years. So I came into apprenticeship through the door of early care and education, and then learned apprenticeship as this incredible model of professional development, which addressed a lot of the unique challenges for professional development in this field. But it makes us a little bit unique because I didn't come in through the door of apprenticeship and then say, oh, maybe I'll work in this sector. I was in a sector, deep in a sector, and tried to then explore apprenticeship on behalf of that sector. So that's who we are, that's who I am. And that certainly has informed both our perspective and our approach and philosophy, and I think also our success.
I don't know how I followed that, but that's pretty fantastic. So, Randy, thanks. My name's Tony Bryan. I'm the executive director of Cyber Up. Cyber Up is a nonprofit headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. We started 10 years and about 30 days ago with the ideas at the very precipice of just cybersecurity being a hot topic in an area where communities were really leaning into what does this look like. It feels a little bit like the current construct of AI, right? And how we're starting to figure out where that works. But rewind to cyber, very similar outcomes. So it was addressed that our community needed an organization to drive workforce development, some education aspect to it, and really be a driver of thinking about these topics. Over the course of our org, we leaned into this idea around workforce and training, and then truly through an elevator ride, meeting somebody from the Missouri Department of Labor asked me about apprenticeship and how it would apply to the work that we were doing. And then fast forward a couple months later, and some great support from that team, we had created the 3rd in the country cybersecurity analyst apprenticeship early on in this. So it's been an 8-year journey. We serve as an intermediary, meaning we actually provide the apprenticeship services for those employer partners we work with, and have done I think a pretty good job of helping recruit and train and prepare some high potential folks, and work with great employer partners across the U.S. To create job opportunities for folks. So excited to share a little bit more with you guys today about that.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And it's interesting that, you're both in two different sectors, industries, but you come in from that kind of industry angle and then come into apprenticeships. It's been the industry first. I wanted to ask a little bit about what the specific talent challenges are in those industries. Tony, let's start with you on cyber.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's flipped, right? I feel like in 25, we have 180 where we started 10 years ago to now, right? There was, the word that pops in my head is a skills gap, right? So I think we've all heard that. We've seen it time and time again. And I feel like we did a good job as a group and a country to really, we'll call it, close a skills gap, right? We invest in a lot of folks and some training and education to provide those skills. And along the way, really had to figure out how to build the employer engagement behind that, right? So for us, finding that way to really bridge the gap to an employer's need, and understanding where they're coming from in this perspective has really been a big driver of how we're engaging and work with those employers. But as we started to this piece, we found quickly apprenticeship is an incredible model, much to which Randy was alluding to, but it took some flexibility and some opportunities to maybe eliminate some of the rigidness that we were able to take on our end as an intermediary to really help build that bridge for those employers, and have found that that's been a great opportunity for us to work specifically with companies. It provides a really good value to work with other education partners because we can be a stack on for them for what we're doing. And it's provided an opportunity just to be universally broad and kind of committed to the actual sector to grow it without any specific need for us, where we're just trying to be a good resource across the board.
Brilliant. And Randy, what about you? I know we've talked about this a lot before. Can you tell us a bit about the workforce crisis in early care and education?
Sure. So, well, okay, I was going to let me address it the way you sort of first said it, which was what are the challenges our industry faces when it comes to all the things we're talking about? Because if I talk about the general childcare crisis, that's going down a whole different path. But so I think for us, in one sense, apprenticeship so uniquely addresses what's needed for the early care and education workforce because of the fundamentals of apprenticeship. And I think one of the things we learned the hard way was, so we thought, oh, this is going to be great. And then what we learned the hard way was from every angle, there were institutional and systemic barriers that impacted our ability to grow and our ability to be sustained. So starting with the on-the-job training. In the world of early care and education, you're usually working with small employers who have very thin profit margins. And so we always compare it to, if you have some major manufacturing plant and they have a director of apprenticeship on site and they have, they sell one more rocket or one more fleet of trucks or something, and then they have more money to play with. That's not even possible in the world of early care and education. So you have small employers who don't have the infrastructure or the funding to necessarily be able to do what's necessary as an employer, to provide mentoring, to do the data tracking and so forth. Okay, then you have the related instruction or the related technical instruction. And there you have a whole world of both community colleges and universities, although we work with many more community colleges. And we always say, when you've worked with one community college, you've worked with one community college. Because as a system, and we work nationally as well as in California, and so we now have that perspective even more broadly. The institutional norms and challenges directly impact our ability to be successful in the apprenticeship world. I'll just say one example. If a community college has a rule that classes must have 40 people in them, then we already have a problem, because we're going to talk about this in a minute, but we serve non-traditional students, and putting 40 non-traditional students, I don't care what they're studying, what subject or what degree they're pursuing, is too many people to give them the individualized support that they need to succeed. So from the minute we started working with community colleges, we also started working with systems change. And then the last piece, of course, is that we are a low wage industry and a critically underfunded industry. And what I always talk about is that it's not a wage issue, it's a funding issue. ECE does not have sustainable funding the way K-12 does, the way community colleges do, the way the post office does. And until that happens, we can only make so much progress. You cannot work in a situation where your very existence is not guaranteed, your industry is not sustainable. So those are the challenges that we face.
Can I add one real quick thing for me? I like on our end, right? The words we're hearing: automate, downsize, offshore, right? Like that's in the tech world right now is a huge concern. And AI or agentic AI is making a pretty big shift to maybe crush some of the entry level job market that's out there as we've come into it now. I've done some preliminary research, and in this space, this represents about a 250 to 450 billion dollar spend over the last 9 to 10 years on this tech training, which as a result, there's about 1,750,000 million folks that are currently trained with skills that can't find employment. And that has impacted around 40% around the DEI efforts that we did. So it's, there's all good efforts and energy, but as we shifted around AI, we have to really lean into, similar to what Randy is saying, is figuring out how do we help enable small business and these other entities as larger companies start to shift away from tier one or entry level roles, that still has to fall, and we can't snap a finger to give skills. So that's a really big thing we're looking through right now, is how do we create infrastructure models that help support small businesses to create infrastructure to hire these folks and maybe clear that bench of large people that are sitting out there. Because I want to make sure I'm like clear that those jobs maybe don't exist, but those jobs are out there and need to be created. So there's a little difference in that. And I think we've got a room to create those jobs because there's a bench ready to go and work there.
And
Yeah,
I think also, just to add one quick thing to what Tony said, I think also sometimes there's a bias in the apprenticeship system to want to create apprenticeships for newcomers, for people who are currently unemployed. That's fine. But there's sometimes just as great a need for apprenticeships for incumbent workers. Because if you don't build the pathway so people actually have economic mobility and career pathways that support the specific thought and intention that has to be put into those training programs, becomes really important for apprenticeships for incumbent workers. And sometimes we're short-sighted to think otherwise.
Yeah, completely agree. It's really interesting, two very different industries, different funding situations, but you're both grappling with a similar challenge of how you work with those smaller employers, especially to build that pipeline. I want to get on to completion. So can you tell us a bit about your experience here? What have your completion rates been in your programs? What have you seen? Let's start with you, Randy.
Okay, so I have statistics, but I have to start by saying we don't have good statistics on completion. We have good statistics, or I shouldn't say good, I should mean up-to-date, measurable statistics on retention. And the reason I make that distinction is, for one thing, some of our programs take 3 or 4 years to complete, and some of our programs are only 2 or 3 years old. So to say there's been zero completion is a distortion. But retention suggests people aren't dropping out. And if you have high retention rates, it should stand to reason that as they keep moving through the program, you will have high completion rates. So our overall retention rate is 77%. And that's across our 35 or whatever it is, 35 programs here in California. We don't measure the stuff outside of California because as an intermediary, that's not our focus. But the programs in California, we're the sponsor. So that is very much our focus. And I think I won't talk now, but I think we're going to talk in a minute about to what do we attribute that, what I think is a fairly impressive retention rate, right? We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We'll get into that. Tony, how about you?
Yeah. And on our end, our challenge isn't the completion, right? Once our folks get in, they're in, right? And I think I would attribute that to, we are very intentional with our employer partners and very clear in terms of just this is how it works, and making sure that there is a clear kind of pathway towards the tail end to support that person through the mentorship and check-ins with the hiring managers and the apprentices each month. So we stand around a 90 to 95% completion. It kind of ranges within there. Once they're in, challenge for us has really been creating the apprenticeship opportunities, right? So once they're in and we get that employer excited, we're good. A couple of the scenarios where maybe it wasn't, and I think we're going to unpack this just a little bit more here in a little bit around maybe some of the barriers or what would prevent that. So I'll skip that for now, but there's been a couple indicators I think that have led to those, maybe somebody who would attrish out during the program, and it really centers around kind of readiness with internal teams and maybe not understanding fully what they're asking for in a person. So we can unpack that too, but yeah. Once they're in, they're in. And that's been a good point there.
And I do want to talk about, how you've got such a good record on retention, but before we do, let's expand on that point about barriers. So what's going wrong here overall? If you zoom out nationally, why have we got such a bad record on apprenticeship completion?
I think the hard part is just the emphasis has been a little bit on the wrong syllable, right? It's the idea around our successes come in the programs we've worked with. We've created intentional pathways, right? We work with them on their org charts. We work with them to understand what their needs are. We understand and identify, okay, if you're a team of 50 and you've got 5 departments, each of those departments has an entry level role that you're going to build in into that, and that's the gatekeep. That's the gateway into that program, and then you provide the education and learning opportunities to keep that person in that space. The best example that I can give, and that's not even a registered apprenticeship, but just because we're in St. Louis, Enterprise Mobility, right, has been doing apprenticeship without doing apprenticeship from the beginning of time. Most people who work at enterprise and a corporate started in a store that each of us have been to in an airport, right, and rented a car from. And that's how they learn the business, and that is their entry point into enterprise. So finding that role within those companies and making that a priority really helps build the intentionality. Kind of one other ad where I think where it got a little loose is that in the absence of that intentionality, folks would go get dollars from maybe a corporate social responsibility bucket or somewhere else. And they would put those folks into a team, but more as a bolt on, right? It wasn't part of the org chart. It wasn't part of the work process. It was just an additional body, to support a program or something else. So when that window, that it didn't necessarily impact the completion, it didn't impact their experience, but in terms of the retention rate, there wasn't a role beyond that. So we wanted to make sure that part's there. So that intentionality, I'll footstep that, is really, really important to make sure you're identifying paths and trying to be as nimble in how you're supporting those pathways for each person.
So lots of what you're seeing there, Tony, is about it's about the work, before the apprentice starts, right? That intentionality, like making sure that the employer really understands what they're doing and has a plan. Randy, how does that chime with you?
So I can speak with authority on the work that we do, but the question you're posing, it's really my own personal sort of, not personal, but my speculation on why there's a bigger problem out there. So I just want to sort of not overstate my insight, right? But here's what I would note. Number one, I think too often apprenticeships are developed and provided in a one-size-fits-all way. And the people developing them, it's like they have a template in front of them. And so today they're going to focus on plumbers and let's fill in the blanks. Now you have your standards, go. Tomorrow we're going to deal with hospitality. Take the plumber standards, change X to Y and 3 to 4, go. Well, that denies understanding the work culture of that industry, the demographic mix of that industry and how that may impact the work culture or the way related instruction or on-the-job training needs to be designed, and so forth and so on. People are not one size fits all. Industries are not one size fits all, and apprenticeship shouldn't be one size fits all. So I think there's really something, and I think Tony and I, like you said, we both come to this from an industry perspective. And I think someone who would call themselves like a generalist, like, oh, I can work with any industry, is only saying that because they don't know better, to be frank, right? So I think that's one problem. The other is what I've heard, and I sat on the Secretary of Labor's Advisory Committee on Apprenticeship for 3 years. And so I got to hear from a lot of different industries and unions and so forth. And so I do have sort of anecdotal information. What I heard, there were 2 things that I think impact these completion rates. One is, in our industry, when we talk about earning an industry credential, like, yes, you get your apprenticeship certificate, but that is not really the thing that matters. The thing that matters is you get your teaching credential. So you can't finish that program you can't get that credential without finishing the program. But there apparently are a lot of programs where finishing isn't really the issue. Once they get to a certain point in the apprenticeship, they've got the skills they need. And whether they drop out of the apprenticeship at that point, nobody really cares. So the example that was given to me was, or the thing when I saw how this operates, I was at a conference, and the community college, who was also sponsoring the apprenticeship, was talking about how they run things. And there's a certain amount of gen ed courses people had to take. But they set up their related instruction such that they didn't bother with the gen ed courses till the end. They front loaded all the technical stuff. So the person I was sitting with, who was a dean at a community college, raised her hand and said, well, when do they get around to taking the gen ed? And the speaker said, we don't care if they ever get around. because they don't really need those gen eds. They just need the skills. So they drop out and we don't care. Okay, then that's when you're going to have a really bad completion rate. But it also begs the question, why is your related instruction irrelevant to their professional development? Because if it is, there's something to figure out there. So that was the second thing, and there was a third thing. See if I can't remember. Let me stop there. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a great point on the design of the courses. I just draw out two things there. Firstly, on the I guess there's a question about, when is completion a problem and when it's not. Is it a problem if someone's leaving a bit before they finish? Maybe they're not getting the certificate at the end of the program, but they're getting the job and they've got the skills and they're getting paid well. Should we be worried about that? Arguably not as much.
Right.
And yeah, a second thought from that. So I mean, what you do as practitioners is really important here. So we looked at this in the UK a lot, and we got really really good data. And completion in the UK a few years ago was about 52, 53%, so not that dissimilar. And we looked at the data and found out that it was really concentrated in a handful of programs. There were a handful of programs that just had incredibly low retention rates, and you could pinpoint it, and it was just really down to what those providers were doing, the supports they weren't putting in place. So yeah, the kind of role of your work really comes out. So with that in mind, moving on to the kind of how we fix it, it would be great to talk a bit about what kind of support you put in place. So Tony, you talked a bit about the kind of, the setup at the beginning, making sure you've got the right fit with the employer, they really understand the job. What do you do, once the apprentice has started? What's the kind of support you put in place? How do you work with the apprentice, the employer, the education provider to make sure they're staying in the program?
Yeah, I mean, so constant communication is always important. I mean, that's been on our part as an integral part, and we're checking in with the apprentice each month. We're checking in with that hiring manager each month. So if there is an obstacle or a hurdle or something, we can have a conversation a little different with that person and make sure we're getting ahead of any type of issues or concerns we may have, because we're walking hand in hand with them. I think a big part for us is one, back to the front part, is really setting clear expectations of what we can do, what we can provide, making sure there's an alignment from that hiring partner as well, that they're willing, that they're going to do that. And we're going to take a lot of it, right? As an intermediary, the standard stuff and the mentorship stuff, we provide an easy button, and we really just want them to focus on the individual and supporting that person's success in the role, right? That's a primary thing. So I think that by proxy gives a leg up, because they're not worried about 10 things now. They're really worried about one, which is aligned to their job. And then the other part is really around the retention. How do we engage with them throughout the year to stay, outside of just the apprenticeship check-ins, but to make sure that this stays top of mind for them as part of their strategy going forward. Measuring success, finding ways in which we can promote those partnerships, right, through webinars or things, because then it adds value. And then really, I think the big part is just telling that word story. It's easy, and Randy alluded to it. We want to pigeonhole everybody into this bucket and do it the same way. And it's hard. There has to be some flexibility within that, to some extent, to be able to not meet the standards, but to give them some ability to work within a government program. Because just time and time again, that's been the scariest part. That agreement to sign with them, to set some expectations, has definitely been a barrier around that of the standards. So helping demystify that, providing an easy button, and really leaning in and understanding what their needs are, have helped quite a bit with large employers. And I was said a little bit earlier, myself in particular, I was very broad, right? I need to meet a new employer, insert company X, and that's like, great, we're an intermediary. We can do apprenticeship however you want. You tell us, and we got you, right? And the problem is they don't know what they don't know. And so if they've never seen it or like have ever imagined how anybody else has ever explored this, it really becomes they're not going to do anything because we've asked for anything, they're going to do nothing. So we have found some value in telling that story directly to like organizations, and it's not a cookie cutter. This has worked for them and this has worked for them. And it's like, oh, that makes sense. And the light bulb goes off and it makes it much more relatable for them to jump in, and like it makes it tangible. And if you can get your employer partner you've done that with to talk to that other person, it's a huge game changer because then it's literally a referral of how that's helped them. So that's been a couple of things around the employer engagement.
That's great. So yeah, if I was to sum that up, communication, and then having kind of, flexibility in a bespoke process with the apprentice maybe, but actually being quite deliberate with the employer about how you think things should work. Randy, over to
So
you. What's the ESET's approach here?
Yeah. So first, let me just completely say yes to everything that Tony was explaining. And it's so interesting because we do come from really different sectors and are facing the same problems and are coming to the same conclusions about how to address some of those problems. So I would say it in two ways. On the one hand, there's the employers and the related instruction providers. We think of it as a partnership. So when we meet, there's times we meet with just the employers, there's times when we meet just with the colleges, but a lot of times it's with this sort of small group. And originally we thought, okay, we'll bring them together for a couple of days of training. We'll teach them everything we know about apprenticeship, and then they'll be good to go. And we'll check in with them quarterly. Wrong. The more they know, the more they understand what they don't know. And the more we understand as their sponsor, we better keep in much closer contact because they have so many needs. Partly, where do you learn this system? And so it's like Tony said, how are they going to learn what they don't know? And who's going to help them address the questions that come up when they start to figure that out? So we end up where, like I was compared to parenting, and I would say to my team, okay, these are 25-year-olds still living in their parents' basement. It's time for them to get their own apartment. And then after a while, it's like, you know what? That's not a good analogy. It's not that they're living in their parents' basement, and it's not that the goal should be that they go find their own apartment. They actually need, sometimes we go from meeting with them every week to meeting with them every couple weeks or even every month. But then something happens, they lose their executive director, the key, success coordinator, it's a role that we've created, leaves. I mean, something happens and suddenly they need more intensive help for a short period. So it's all of that. That's on the employer and the RI instructors, providers. Let me share again another slide. On the apprentice side, okay, do you see the big slide? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. This is a slide that we've used. We used to call it our secret sauce, except then we realized it was a secret we didn't want to keep secret at all. So we keep changing the title. But there was an article put out by the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at Berkeley years ago called Chutes or Ladders. And it was a really good, I would recommend it. I'll put it in the, Noemi, if you'll look that up, the link, and put it in the chat, that would be great. One of my people is on the call. Because it talked about what are the supports that non-traditional students need in any, no matter what. So we took that as sort of our foundational framework, and then we built on it. So I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but what this shows you is we think of the participant supports and services that we provide in sort of 4 categories. Number 1, we have to pick up all the costs. In our industry in particular, you can't expect folks to pay for college tuition. You have to provide transportation, whatever. Number 2, participant centered on the job training, meaning we talk about everything for us is about ensuring participant success. So when we talk about a no-fail policy, it's not that we don't want the apprentices to fail. Of course we don't. The no-fail is on the shoulders of the employer and the training providers. If an apprentice is failing, I want to look at the program design. I want to look at how the RI is being provided and all that, so that the focus is on participant success. Similarly, we have all these staff people, some of our programs, when they're brand new, they don't always have the resources to provide everything. So I should say not every program of ours does all of this, but this is the goal. And many of them do all or, a large percentage of these services. And then likewise, participant-centered RI. We have to tell colleges, these people are working full time. Do not tell me the course they're taking is going to be on Tuesday and Thursday from 1 to 2:30. That is never going to work. And do not tell me they have to take the course on campus, which is not accessible by public transit. Oh, why did that happen? I don't know where I went. Let me stop sharing and see if that helps.
Randy, you're still
Okay.
with us. Yeah.
Yes, but my video went off. Anyways, to a campus that's not accessible by public transportation, or that going there at night is not so safe, and so forth and so on. So again, I don't want to belabor every little point in this, except to say we think of guaranteeing participant success as that's the North Star. And you have to set up every aspect of your apprenticeship committee, which partners which college you work with, all that, with that in mind. And I think, Amy put so there's the link to the article that I was talking about, which I would encourage people to read, no matter what sector you're working in, if you're working with non-traditional students.
I love the not so secret sauce. That's great. I want to pick up on that non-traditional students point. So, both of you have come from a strong equity perspective. You've got a strong social mission about expanding access. Is there anything you need to think about in particular, when you're working with underrepresented groups? Is there anything you need to think about particular in terms of retention?
You want me to start?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't care. Go ahead, Tony. Feel free.
I just for us, I think early on, we recognized what we were good at, and we recognized what others were good at, and we try to find the marriage of sorts, right? So, we have been able to create a good curriculum, a good framework, and how we prepare people, and then also doing the jobs. But oftentimes, based off of partnerships, right? And as a nonprofit, a lot of our funding comes in with demographics. So there's a veteran aspect to it, or WIOA. So we have found that finding community partners that would maybe provide wraparound services or things that we wouldn't be good at, or that are very costly to provide, to lean in with them, then provide those to their audience, and then to make sure that we're doing it. A good example, we recently partnered with the Urban League in St. Louis. We're very fortunate to have a very large urban league here in our city. So we've recruited 40 folks, right? We found a private foundation. We went to Urban League and said, we wanted to recruit folks from our Save Our Sons and Save Our Daughters program. They helped provide them with the wraparound services and a laptop, and provided a place for them to come together and do it. We provided the instruction, and we'll support them both throughout the way. So that, I think recognizing what you're good at, recognizing what you could partner with or outsource to, is a really good way to make sure you're providing good programs and services.
And so what I would add, trying to think how to say this in an acceptable manner, particularly in this moment, words like equity and access and diversity, have become risky. But when you ask the question, Harry, how do you make sure you're going to have success with marginalized communities and so forth? I think I like what Tony said. It is putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. It's not because they're marginalized communities that they need special supports. It's that institutional barriers exist because of how institutions have been set up and who they've been set up to serve. And so what you're contradicting, what you're challenging, is those kinds of assumptions. Like in ECE, and certainly this is going to be true as more and more K-12 systems try to set up apprenticeships. In education, the traditional thing is you go to college for 4 years, then you do your student teaching at the end of those 4 years, and then you go find a job as a second grade teacher. The assumption is you're a full-time college student while you're in college, you're 22 years old when you graduate, and you can afford to go to college without having to work, and then you go find a full-time job. Well, that's not about marginalized communities. What it is about is a socioeconomic priority, or I'm missing the word. There is a socioeconomic component to why a person who just came here a year ago from another country and who's already working 2 jobs just to make ends meet cannot fit that model. So part of it is becoming smarter and smarter about what are the challenges people face that reflect systemic challenges that need to be changed. And if they can't be changed, then how do you adapt what you do and how you offer it? So like in California, I'm not sure I'm going to get this quite right. So anybody from California, don't jump on me if I get it a little bit wrong. But I think the basic thing is a college can't offer a course in a different language other than English unless there's an English section of that class as well, offered during the same semester. That's a big barrier if 90% of your people in your cohort, Spanish is their first language. So what do you do if it's something the college really doesn't have the power to challenge? Then maybe you have to, as the sponsor or as the intermediary, figure out how to offer in-class translation and so forth and so on. So that's I think what I would say is looking at it not so much about how do you serve marginalized communities. It's what are the systemic challenges that make the success of marginalized and historically underserved communities not be able to take part in what's supposed to be a system of workforce development.
That's a great way of framing it. How do you help with the socioeconomic barriers? So, yeah. I want to ask one more question from me before I bring in anything from our audience.
Oh, Harry, I'm sorry. Let me backtrack 1 second to what we were talking about before. When you asked before about the completion rates, this isn't quite checkboxes. The workforce we serve checks all those versus access and so forth. It surprised me when I found that there were a lot of set up to meet the needs, particularly middle class. When you think about how apprenticeship set up, who's succeeding and who's failing, the very fabric of the system and what industries are you trying to offer apprenticeships through. And if those industries currently are dominated by middle-class people, even if it's not middle-class men, but your target population is not that, then right there is where the rubber meets the road. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, we talked about this a bit on your podcast yesterday, which I recommend to everyone. Where just by the structure of apprenticeship, you're getting rid of those socioeconomic barriers, right? So it's not like
Yes.
you necessarily need to do anything different. You just don't
That's
have
right.
those cost barriers. Yeah. Last question from me. What advice would you give to a new apprenticeship program starting today about how to think about retention?
Good, Tony, you take it.
I mean, I think it comes from setting clear and very clear and outlined structure at the front, agreeing upon mutual outcomes and leveraging the apprenticeship standards as your foundation, and then wrapping everybody around a nice customer service hug, right? I think if you lay those foundations and you build that pathway within a level of trust, and I think setting realistic expectations, not saying you're going to provide super duper AI 3.0 person, but you're really giving somebody an entry level developer, right? So really setting expectations of where those folks are coming, and also really lean in. There's so many things I've learned along the way, right, of things that were impacting our conversations with employers. It took me some time to understand and perspective from other folks around cyber is one of the only industries that if something goes wrong and I'm the person in charge of that team, I could be held personally liable for those instances, right? So now, if I'm a team of 10 and I bring an apprentice in and that person creates something that happens to my org and I'm responsible for it, that's a problem, right? So that does in the back of my head raise some red flags as to maybe of why I wouldn't want to jump into that because I would assume some risk, right? The other flip of that is, in talent folks, we think like we want them to be our best friends and like they're great, but they're also the same as us. They're worrying a little bit right now about uncertainty in the job market. And so we're coming here with answers, right? We're going to solve your problems and give you this great pathway of people. And they're like, well, heck, they're going to take my job, right? Because if they're going to be so valuable, so like there's personal motivations here for folks. So I think knowing those things up front, addressing some of those along the way will really help speed you up towards a tail end and understand, a better way to package that conversation to help the apprentice be successful in the end.
That's a great point.
And what I would add is two things. One is, so the question was, what do you tell someone like a new entity that's just starting, right? Number one, you have to know the industry you're working with. You have to not only know the industry and its needs, the market needs, and its challenges, but you have to know the population you're targeting and their needs and their challenges, so that you're actually not doing it one size fits all. You are developing a program that's going to succeed for this group of workers in this workforce. That's number one. And then number two, do not underestimate the amount of help those employers and training institutions are going to need along the way, because it's a really complicated system. There's not, you can go to apprenticeship.gov, but I really don't think you can get very far just from downloading documents from apprenticeship.gov. You do need to find ways to learn the system, to understand your own state system, whether it's an SAA, whether it's a DOL state, and then the kind of hand-holding they're going to need along the way, and to be able to, sort of deliver the dosage that they need so that they really are supported to succeed. The employers I'm talking about. Therefore, then the apprentices can be set up to succeed. But you can't underestimate that. This is not a quick or inexpensive model, and it requires a whole lot of training and technical assistance. This is where intermediaries becomes skilled intermediaries, informed intermediaries become so important, which is another conversation, but it's tangential.
Great points. Don't underestimate the complexity of bringing employers along the journey here. And back to Tony's point, think about how you communicate with your talent colleagues. Don't imply you're putting them out of a job. Brilliant. I'm going to open up for any questions or comments from our audience. I don't think we've got anything in the chat, but does anyone want to put their hand up and ask a question or make a point?
While those are coming in, the only thing I would add in terms of, for recommendations, you don't have to always go write new standards, right? Like there are a lot of standards that exist. And, I think we encouraged a little bit around of just making programs, program after program rather than apprentice. So sometimes, there are existing standards that you could tap into that makes your life easier. So, always find a partner or maybe somebody who you could walk along with, because the amount of standards has a tendency to make things murky. And if there's lots of people having similar conversations with the same employers, we have a hard enough time internally differentiating apprenticeship, but let alone, 20 people talking to one employer gets really confusing pretty quickly. So that's where some standardization there becomes important.
Yeah, good point. We actually do have standards for almost every occupation now. There's been a massive growth in the last few years.
100%.
Yeah. I want to concur with Heather's comment in the chat box. Number one, that if institutions of higher education generously gave credit for prior learning and credit for on-the-job, not even prior, credit for on-the-job training, significant credit, it would be a complete game changer with completion rates, but also with serving, people who don't have the money, frankly, to go to a traditional college pathway. And I think along with that, this is my dream, and I admit to you, it is a dream. But in California with our apprentices, so let's say they are going to get what we call our associate teacher permit. That's the entry-level permit, right? It's 4 college classes and 150 hours of OJT. That's what the Commission on Teacher Credentialing requires. But because it's an apprenticeship, they're taking those 4 college classes and they're getting 2,000 hours of on-the-job training, and it is supervised, and it is mentored, and on and on and on. When they graduate, when they complete that apprenticeship, why on earth would they get the very same certification of someone who did 4 classes with not being part of a cohort, not being part of a system, and did 150 hours? Why is that the same pay level? So I'm waiting for their, and at some point I know Pennsylvania did this. They had like a salary scale where it's like ECE 1 made such and such amount of money upon completion, but ECE 2 or something like that meant they were coming through an apprenticeship. They started at higher wage. So that it's not only the acknowledgement of the prior learning and the current learning in terms of translating that into college credit so you can finish more quickly, the degree, but also actually getting credit for the value of an apprenticeship over not doing an apprenticeship. Because in terms of this country, you know, I talk to people all the time, all you guys who go overseas to study Europe and all that, right? But it's not the same. That's the thing, right? But if we're trying to get apprenticeship to be seen as not only a viable career pathway, but a better one, there needs to be a dollar and cents figure about that. If you take this pathway instead of a traditional pathway, here's the economic, besides getting a raise as you go through. So that's the other thing I would say is we have to start insisting that someone who comes through an apprenticeship, if you can prove it, if you can demonstrate it, has more skills, more insight, more experience, and should not be paid as an entry-level person, you know, all things being equal.
Yeah, completely. And we know it's possible, right? There are colleges, there are states who have found ways to recognize and give credit for on the job learning. We're just early in the journey. We've got one question from Teresa about pre-apprenticeships. Have you explored pre-apprenticeship approach to break down the number of hours requirements?
Well, I just need to understand what she means by to break down the number of hours required. Do you mean so they don't have to do 2,000 hours? Is that what you mean?
Exactly. So making it more accessible, an individual may see 2,000 hours as just overwhelming. So saying that you're doing a pre-apprentice kind of pathway to it may help to draw in more individuals to participate.
So we used to do pre-apprenticeships a lot for exactly the reason you just said. Because by the time they were halfway through their pre-apprenticeship and they took a college course and they did well and they started to have a little confidence under their wings, we'd say, you know, when you're done, you could go into the apprenticeship. And then they were ready to hear that. So I agree with you as sort of a marketing strategy and giving people a step on the ladder that they can reach before you try to get them on the 3rd step. The problem is, at least from our experience, nobody funds pre-apprenticeships. And so you sort of, as a funder, as a sponsor, it can become sort of not workable because you have 40 people enrolled in a pre-apprenticeship. And if they were apprentices, you'd be able to qualify for XYZ funding. And so more and more we've moved away from that, but it's more like it's complicated. But the idea is they will pick up that entry-level thing as they go, and they could drop out and stay there. But ultimately, even if you had a pre-apprenticeship, you don't want them to stop just with that. So the issue is, how do you get them to get on the train, build their confidence so they can keep moving to upper levels? And in terms of the way the system is set up, like in California, you can register a pre-apprenticeship, but it's really, they think of pre-apprenticeships to be like a 6-week training thing. You know, you have to learn how to screw in a light bulb before you enter the electrician's thing. In ECE, it's 4 college classes. By that time, they might as well be in an apprenticeship and get the benefits of that.
All right, thank you for your perspective on that. Thank you very much.
Zach,
Great.
looks like Zach had a hand up, by the way. I want to make sure.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was having a hard time finding the raised hand function. That's on me. Great presentation, and of course, AFA, great job on surfacing this. This is a really important topic. Harry, you and team did a really great analysis on the America's Talent Strategy that came out a month ago, and in that, there's a specific call out to finding ways to enhance the value proposition for apprenticeship amongst employers. All of what we said today. I wonder your insights in what ways we do that going forward. And I'll kind of pause there and get your thoughts on that.
That is a great question. It leads to what you were speaking about earlier, Andy. I mean, I guess the fundamental part of it is we have a very messy credential landscape where we have like one dominant product, which is a degree. Every employer knows what a degree is. They recognize it. It's got currency in the labor market. And then we have a whole bunch of other credentials, including registered apprenticeship, where, you know, employers that use that stuff, or whether it's got a kind of specific, you know, technical skills attached, might understand it, but they're just not. It doesn't carry the same kind of labeling effect in the labor market in general. So to me, that's just a big question about branding there. How do we get employers just to recognize apprenticeship as a model? I'm not sure you necessarily need, you know, there's a lot of technical stuff about credentials and the world of credentials under that, but I think there's a big question just about the branding of apprenticeship and awareness and value of it from employers. Randy, Tony, anything to add?
I think it's just the big thing for me has always been the fear around, you know, companies and government, right? And then for us, you sprinkle in cyber and government. Those are, you want to keep this far away because that means you've had something bad go wrong. So that's, you know, there's a level of hesitancy there of what you're welcoming into that space. So I don't know that it's necessary. I'm not going to dismiss their feelings because that would be wrong. You know, I don't think it's necessarily, it's not unwarranted, but in the grand scheme, there's ways that you can mitigate that through intermediary or other things. So there's options to make that a little easier. But yeah, that's definitely an important part there.
We're almost at time. I'm just going to very quickly take Heather's question in the sidebar, which is about industries. You know, where we're seeing the largest emerging apprenticeship cohorts in the US. So we're about to put out some analysis in the next few months that is going to look at this among other things. But just off the top of my head, so we're still, you know, construction's fairly dominant. It's about 2/3 of apprenticeships. If you look at new apprenticeships, apprentices are starting in almost every industry. It's about 50% construction, 50% everything else. I think the biggest non-traditional sectors we see: healthcare, education, possibly business services, tech, manufacturing are the other kind of big emerging sectors that we see. But we do have apprentices starting in, you know, all fields. This isn't just about technical or vocational occupations. It's a model that can work for everything. Okay, I think we're just about at time. So last thing to do, I just really want to thank Tony and Randy for coming and sharing all your expertise and knowledge. You did brilliant work. I feel like we should do an AI summary of this as kind of top tips for everyone. But yeah, thank you for your time, sharing all your expertise. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you guys. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.